There's just a lot of change. And I think it's really important that we understand that change is a part of being a Christian. That's just a part of life. Change isn't just a part of being a Christian. It's just a part of being human. Styles, it's changed from one head to another head. Any of you ladies with wigs understand that, right? But it changed, that we go through changes. We have different dynamics, and that's really the way life is. And God is constantly changing us and making us into who He wants us to be. And it reminds me of a story that this guy that him and his friend, they get together every few weeks, hang out, have lunch, and the guy. One of the guys really had a bad habit of worrying. He worried about everything. He was a constant worrier, and finally his friend told him, listen, we meet every 2 or 3 weeks, have lunch, hang out, talk, catch up. And he said, your constant worrying is starting to affect a lot in your life. It's affecting, your health. You told me how you went to the doctor and your blood pressure's up and you're having heart problems and all this stuff. And said, you talked to me about how things are getting bad in your marriage and in your family and all these different areas of your life. The worrying that you're doing is really affecting you in a negative way. You got to do something about this. And so he talked to him a little bit about more, and he said, okay, I'm going to change some things. So they got together 2 or 3 weeks later, and he walked in, and the guy looked completely different. He said, man, you look well rested. You look like, you're at peace. He said, and he talked to him, and he said, yeah, my marriage is doing better, and went to the doctor, my blood pressure's down, and I took what you said to heart, and I just made some changes in my life. And he said, well, what did you do to stop worrying so much? He said, well, I hired a professional worrier. He said, what do you mean? He said, I hired a professional worrier. He said, I've got somebody now that I pay to worry for me. And so he said, well, how in the world does that work? He said, well, anytime there's something stressful that hits my life, I email him, I text him, and I pass that whole task and everything on to him. I said, hey, I'm not going to worry about this. You take care of it. You worry about it, and just make sure everything turns out okay. And he said, man, he said, how in the world do they do that? He said, well, I pay him to do it. He said, well, how much do you pay him? He said, I pay him $100,000 a year to worry for me. And he said, well, wait a minute. He said, you pay somebody $100,000 a year to worry for you. He said, I know good and well you're paying him more than you make in a year. He said, how in the world can you afford that? He said, I don't know. I don't worry about him. I worry about it. I let him do that. And so some of us in life, we need professional worriers. We need to make a change. But really, change isn't that easy. You can't just hire somebody to help you change. You can't just pay somebody to make change take place in your life. And when you look at the story of Zacchaeus, a lot of times we look at it and we look at, the faith, and we talk about it from all different angles. But really, Zacchaeus is looking for change in his life. Zacchaeus, it says that he was the chief tax collector. He was the supervisor. Now, how many of you know that supervisors always get paid more even if they don't deserve more? Right? Now, I'm not going to ask you if you got a supervisor that doesn't deserve more than you do. But supervisors always get paid more. And here's Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, and he's the supervisor. He's over all the other tax collectors. And if you went through and made a list of like the 10 most despicable, low-down, dirty jobs in New Testament days, tax collector would be number one. Man, everybody hated the tax collectors because the tax collectors, they use that opportunity, they use that office to extort money from people. You think our government's bad? No. Our government doesn't have anything on the tax collectors of this day. They would lock you up. They'd take your kids. They were ruthless. And so they would do whatever they had to get money. And let me put it this way. How many of you know you don't necessarily always get to be, you don't get to be the chief crook by being a good guy. Right? Now listen, y'all got to wake up. If y'all don't wake up, I'm going to put the mic down and let one of y'all preach, okay? You got to wake up, get up. I'm going to make everybody stand, okay? Y'all ready? Do we need to do some calisthenics? Okay. So No, only one of you's like, no, I ain't doing no calisthenics, Pastor Brian. And some of you are like, what are calisthenics? Some of you young people, what in the world is a calisthenic? Oh, goodness, man, I'm old. But anyway, Zacchaeus wanted change, and it was because he had this really bad reputation, because he was a really bad guy. He was the baddest of the bad guys. He was the worst of the worst guys. And that's why he was the chief tax collector. And here, when you look at Zacchaeus' life, you know, he's known for being a crook, but he hears that Jesus is coming. And while Zacchaeus is really known for being the worst of the worst, Jesus is known for being the best of the best. And he says, while I may be the worst crook, Jesus, I've heard about him, and he takes the worst lives and brings the best out of them. Isn't that great about Jesus? He takes the worst lives and brings the best out of them. That he can take an adulterous woman and all of a sudden, just in a moment, radically change her life, clean her up, and send her on her way to sin no more. That just amazes me. And so Zacchaeus has heard this about Jesus. I've got to get out there and something has to change in my life. Can you imagine being known as the worst guy in the whole community? Maybe you are. I don't know. Hopefully you're not known as being the worst person in your community. Hopefully you're not known as being the worst person on your job or in your school or whatever. But the reality is, how miserable would it be to be known as the worst crook in town? Okay? That's what Zacchaeus was known for. And he said, something about that has to change. You know, it's okay when the money's coming in. It's okay on collection day, right? It's okay when you're looking at your bank account. But when you walk out your door and you have no friends. You walk out your door and everybody looks at you and scowls. You walk out your door and nobody wants to be around you. If you get sick, nobody's bringing you chicken noodle soup. If there's a death in your family, nobody's coming to the funeral. All of a sudden you realize something's got to change, because I've lived life and being rich and being wealthy and having all this money and having all that wealth and everything. It was good for a time, but I don't like the name that I have. I don't like the reputation that I have. I don't like the fact that I can't have community with anybody because I'm known for being the worst of the worst. And so here he is. It says something has to change. And he had this deep-rooted belief that Jesus could change his life. Now, for you and I, a lot of times we don't embrace change. We don't like change that much, right? Some of us like change, but some of us, we wouldn't change our socks if they didn't start to stink. Okay? But the reality is but change is good. Let your neighbor say, change is good. So when you look at this, you have to believe that Zacchaeus is searching for Jesus because he believed that Jesus could change his life. And our belief in Jesus' ability to change our lives is found in how desperately we search for Jesus. If you notice Zacchaeus here, he runs out and he doesn't just passively try to encounter Jesus. Zacchaeus realizes, I've got to put myself in the best position to find Jesus. He's searching for Jesus. He's desperate in that search. Desperate enough that a grown man climbed a tree. Now, let's say after church today, you know, the only way to get banana pudding that Pastor K made was to climb a tree. How many of y'all think Brother David would be climbing that tree out there? I think you see David Brown in the top of whatever tree you told him to climb. And he'd have to climb it twice so he could get some for Sister Margaret. Get Mom Charles some banana pudding as well. But that's how desperate Zacchaeus is. He says, you know what? I've got to search and I've got to seek out and I've got to find a place that I can encounter Jesus so that I can find the change that I want in my life. And see, many of us, when we're looking for change, a lot of times we're looking for change to come into our life because we want change to happen to us. How many of you ever want change to happen to you? Okay? We say, God, change me. How many of you ever prayed that prayer? God, change me. Okay? We pray that prayer and say, God, what we're basically saying is, we want you to change us without me having to do anything. God, change me. Change me. I want change to happen to me. It's like if you go and you sit down in the chair and you get your nails done. Okay, that's how many of us view change when it comes to God. You go sit in a chair, they come in, they pet your hands, put some lotion on it, scrub around a little bit, spray some color on it, and by the time you leave that 30, 45-minute session and you pay a little money, then you walk out looking better than you did when you went in. Okay? That is how we want God to change us. We want to come to church. We want to give in the offering. We want to hear a word. We want to have an altar service. And when we leave here, we want something to have happened to us so that when we leave here, we look and feel and act better. Okay? Change does not happen to you that way. Some of us, we want change to happen to us. Some of us, we want change to happen around us. We don't want to change, but we want everything else around us to change. Anybody like that in here? Okay? A couple of y'all raising your hands. We got some good, honest folks here today. We're okay with everything else changing around us. We want other people to change. We want other people to change and adapt to us. We want situations to change. We want our bank accounts to change. How many of you want your bank account to change? See, everybody raised their hand. Look at that. See, I knew I'd get it one way or the other, okay? You start talking about change in your life. Is it changing your money? Yes, Jesus. Change my money. Multiply it. Increase my territory. Whatever you got to do. Put some more zeros at the end of my bank account. Okay? But we want change to happen around us. We want things to change in our life. We want an increase in funds. We want better relationships. We want other people around us to change to fit our mindsets, our thought processes, all that stuff. And so we embrace change when it happens to us and when it happens around us. But we're not so thrilled about the way God does change, and that happens in us. Okay? That happens in you. True change happens in you. And see, that comes through you having a heart and a belief and a faith that in your searching for Jesus Christ, that he can do something in your life that changes the inside of you. See, Zacchaeus was known on the outside as a crook, but Zacchaeus in his heart wanted something different, wanted something more, and that's why he was searching for Jesus. He wanted something to happen inside of here, because I can tell you, you can have all the stuff on the outside, but still on the inside be real miserable. You can have all the stuff just the way you want it on the outside. You can have all the stuff that everybody thinks that you need and that you want, but on the inside, you're absolutely miserable, and that's where Zacchaeus was, and he wanted the change to happen in him. And the reality is for him to put himself in that position, he had to desperately search to get into an encounter with Jesus Christ. And that's why you see he climbs this tree and Jesus comes by. And Jesus, when he says, hey, come down here, I'm going to your house, it says that he did it quickly. I picture Zacchaeus, this little dude up in a tree. I picture Zacchaeus just jumping out of the tree. Did it quickly. Let me just jump out of this tree, and I'm going to do whatever I can. I'm going to get to Jesus as quickly as I can. I'm going to get into my house as quickly as I can before he changes his mind and decides to go somewhere else. Because all of a sudden, everybody else around started saying, why in the world is he going to this guy's house? Why is Jesus hanging out with a sinner? See, all of a sudden it goes from he's just a crook, just a thief, just a really bad guy, to where everybody looked at him as a sinner. Because they understood how bad of a guy he really was. And so here, when you look at this, Zacchaeus, he looks at this and he says, hey, I need this change. I'm desperate for this change. But many times, we don't like the change that has to take place in us. And so when Jesus says, okay, let me come to your house so that we can work out this change, we're saying, okay, Jesus, change me at church, but don't follow me home. Change me on the road, but don't come home with me. Because then it gets personal. It gets real intent. And so we fail to embrace change. Because embracing change requires something from us that many of us don't like. that you see in Zacchaeus' life. It requires this one single action. I'm going to give you probably one of the greatest keys to change in your life. Okay? One simple point today. One single simple point. This is a one-point message, okay? You're not going to get that much from me. One-point message. For change to take place in your life, you have to do the exact opposite of what you want to change. You have to do the exact opposite of what you want to change. What do you see take place in Zacchaeus' life? He says, I'm a crook, I'm a tax collector, I'm the worst of the worst. But as soon as change happens in his life, what takes place? It says, and Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'm going to give it back 4 times. So this person that was used to taking and subtracting from people's lives his entire life, in a moment with Christ says, I understand what change means in a person's life. It means that everything that I was doing wrong, I have to do the exact opposite of it. So when I was an extreme crook, now I'm going to be an extreme giver. I'm going to go from taking from everybody to where half of everything I have now goes to the poor. Now, I used to be a huge extortionist. I would even defraud people. I would take people and I would manipulate things and I would make them look like they owed more taxes than they actually owed. And then I would take all this money from them. I'm going to take those people and I'm going to give them 4 times what I took from them back. He became the exact opposite person. And you know what we do a lot of times as Christians is we want to be well-rounded. Have you ever heard that term? I want to be well-rounded. And I don't mean physically. Okay? I want to be well-rounded. You know, I want to be one of those people that are just even keel. You know, when it comes to my life, you know, I don't want to be too poor, but I don't want to be too rich. And you know, well, I don't know if that's true or not. Everybody wants to be rich, right? But I want to be middle of the road. I just want to be a good person. I want to do just I'm not going to be really fanatical about God, but I don't want to be cold either. And we just sort of play this middle of the road game. I want to be a well-rounded person. And the reality is you never experience change that way. You never experience change that way. In your life, if you want change, you've got to learn to do the exact opposite. You can't just change by simply saying, I'm no longer going to do this. I'm no longer going to be this way. Change takes place by replacing what you used to do with the extreme opposite behavior of what you used to do. Here he's saying, I was an extreme thief, but now I'm going to be an extreme giver. For some of us, we would have to say, hey, I was an extreme gossiper. Any gossips in the house? Nobody gets on the phone, shares all the information, you know. Nobody? Okay. I was an extreme gossiper, but now I have to be an extreme affirmer of people. I was an extreme complainer. Now I have to be a person of extreme gratitude. Any complainers in the house? Okay, you need to learn to have a spirit of gratitude. You need to wake up every morning. God, you have to have this attitude of gratitude. I was a bitter person, and you have to become a person of extreme grace and forgiveness. You got to switch. You can't be that person that's constantly unforgiving, constantly bitter. You have to become a very gracious and forgiving person. I was an angry person, extremely angry, and I become a person of extreme kindness. So you have to do the complete opposite. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to be okay with this. You know, I can remember I worked for a guy when I was in high school. I worked for him, and he used to be one of the meanest, ugliest people you'd ever want to be around. He just hated people. He was in the mob and in the mafia at one time up in Philadelphia, and he'd just shoot you as look at you. And he was just a mean person. And but when God changed his life, there's one thing I can say about him. it was a complete night and day difference. When he first started coming to church, wasn't a Christian, and I started working for him, hey, I'm telling you, it was night and day how he acted. He went from a person of extreme anger and hatred and just didn't care about anybody. He as soon as just rob you as anything else, to where, man, he was just the givingest person. He was the kindest person. He still had his issues, but, man, he was just the kindest person. He loved people. The body shop that he managed, right next to it, FAO Schwartz Toy Company used it as a warehouse. He would go in there and buy thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of toys from FAO Schwartz from their warehouse, and then he would just take them out and give them to needy kids in the community. He'd go out. We had a church bus that brought in needy kids from the community, and, man, every week he was giving them toys and loving on them and loving on people in our church. There was people in our church that he gave cars to, and he just did whatever he could to be kind and compassionate to people. And that's what it takes for God to change your life. You've got to be willing to do the exact opposite of what you used to be. You've got to embrace change that way. And so embracing change ultimately means embracing a relationship with Jesus Christ. Because you're constantly going to be going through life doing the exact opposite of what you used to do. And as soon as God affects change in one area of your life, and maybe you are an unforgiving, bitter person, and all of a sudden you become the kindest person in the world and people think you're crazy now. You ever seen somebody like that? All of a sudden they come in and they start being kind. You're like, what are you up to? Okay, why are you being nice to me? When that change starts happening, once that change takes place, then God moves to another area of your life. He says, okay, now we need to do the exact opposite in this area. And so we've got to really learn to embrace change, because that's God's way of progressing us through life and blessing us. You look what happens to Zacchaeus after this. Jesus goes to his house, and the next thing you know, Zacchaeus starts giving out all this stuff to the poor and the needy. Now look at the difference. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the change in how the community viewed Zacchaeus after his encounter with Jesus Christ? Where he used to be a crook, now he's giving to the poor and the needy. Now, what's he doing? He's going out, he's restoring all this stuff back. The reputation in the community, how do you think it changed for Zacchaeus as a result of the change that he embraced through Jesus Christ? Radical difference. Zacchaeus, once being known as a crook, now being known as the giver. You know, and I can bet you that there were plenty of people that was like, man, what's Zacchaeus up to? Is he going to charge us interest on all this money he's giving us back, or what's happening? But ultimately the reputation that he had changed. And see, God wants you to be blessed, and God wants you to have community, and God wants you to be able to have relationships and all these things, but it all comes through your willingness to change. Look at your neighbor and say, I'm willing to change. So with that, we've got to understand the church is going through some changes, right? Church is going through some changes, and so you see that change is not bad, right? Let your neighbor say, change is not bad.